Prologue: the gilded rot behind the marble facade of empire. We open not in the squalor of the Subura, but in the blinding sunlight of the Forum. Here, where senators draped in white proclaim the eternal glory of Rome, we begin to trace the first cracks in the marble. This is a world where unparalleled public virtue masks a private depravity so profound it would eventually consume the very heart of the civilization that bred it. The currency of cruelty: how pain became a unit of social status. In Rome, the infliction of suffering was not merely an act of violence, it was a meticulously calibrated language. From the tribunals to the triclinium, we examine how the elite used pain, administered to slaves, subjects, and even themselves, as a measurable currency to purchase prestige, demonstrate absolute power, and stave off the specter of boredom that haunted their gilded lives. The slave as an animated tool, dehumanization as a civic duty. Cato the Elder's chilling advice to discard old slaves like worn-out plowshares was not monstrous brutality by the standards of the day. It was sound economic doctrine. We delve into the philosophical and legal frameworks that rendered millions into instrumentum vocile, talking tools, and explore the horrific, everyday consequences of this sanctioned reality within the elite Roman household. The banquet of the damned culinary theater and calculated humiliation. The Roman *Cena was far more than a feast. It was a psychodrama of power. We will reconstruct these evenings of engineered excess, where the point was not the food or wine, but the performance of dominance, from serving dishes of living songbirds to the systematic humiliation of lower-ranking guests, all while philosophers debated virtue in the next room. The sexual politics of domination, beyond the tales of orgies. Moving past salacious clichés, we uncover a system where sexual acts were fundamentally acts of politics and conquest. The elite Roman's sexual prerogative was a microcosm of the state's power, a relentless assertion of the active, penetrating, dominant role over anyone, male, female, slave, or subject, deemed passive and subordinate by their station. The myth of the dormouse, a calculated distraction. We begin with the familiar tropes: honey-glazed dormice, stuffed sow's udders, stewed parrot. But these were not the zenith of Roman excess. They were a carefully cultivated facade. This was the performative weirdness the elite wanted the common citizen to discuss in awe. It served as a brilliant smokescreen, distracting from the far more sinister culinary philosophies that govern the true inner sanctum of their power. Apicius, the gastronomic architect of cruelty. In the recipes of Marcus Gavius Apicius, we find not just instructions, but a manifesto. His text, *De Re Coquinaria, moves beyond flavor to engineer suffering as a core sensory experience. From live animals cooked in ways to ensure a specific texture at the moment of death, to sauces designed to accentuate the terror in the meat, Apicius codified a truth. For the Roman elite, supreme artistry was inseparable from the deliberate administration of pain. The vomitorium fallacy and the truth of the mulsum vomit. Contrary to popular myth, there were no special rooms for vomiting. The reality was more insidious. The practice was a mobile, intentional discipline. By drinking a warm, honeyed wine, mulsum, to induce regurgitation, a patrician wasn't merely binge eating. He was staging a physical conquest, a demonstration that his will could override the most basic limits of human biology. It was the ultimate act of declaring oneself above nature itself. Pets or pantry, the Murray eel's death sentence. For the elite, even companionship was a lie waiting to be shattered. Grand villas featured elaborate piscine saltwater tanks where lethally beautiful moray eels, often adorned with jewels, were kept as beloved curios, until the climax of a dinner. Their dramatic tableside slaughter, transforming a living pet into an immediate delicacy, served a dual purpose. It proved unmatched wealth, and more crucially, it theatricalized the host's godlike power over life and death for a moment's fleeting palate pleasure. The final taboo, sanguis gladiatoris and the banquet of the damned. Here we cross from grotesque luxury into the realm of infernal rumor. Contemporary satirists like Petronius whispered of a darkness beyond even Apicius. We dissect the persistent tails of a dish known as sanguine gladiatoris the blood or flesh of slain gladiators consumed to absorb their virtus their violent vitality. Whether literal practice or metaphorical critique, these stories reveal a terrifying belief among the ruling class that true power could only be ingested from the most potent and most human of sacrifices. The Lex Iulia deception, legislating a nation of hypocrites. Augustus's moral legislation was a masterstroke of political theater, a public crusade for family values that in practice built a state-sanctioned labyrinth of hypocrisy. By criminalizing adultery and promoting marriage among the elite, these laws didn't eradicate vice, they simply monopolized it. They created a lucrative black market for discretion, where the very senators who passed the laws became its highest-profile offenders, protected by wealth and status, while the powerless faced exile or death. Infamia, the legal brand of the hunted. Roman law engineered a permanent underclass for elite exploitation through infamia a state of legal and social disgrace. This wasn't a mere stigma, it was a binding legal status applied to actors, gladiators, and prostitutes. Infamia stripped away the protections of a full citizen, rendering their bodies perpetually and legally accessible. Their very profession was considered consent, making any sexual advance from a social superior not a crime, but an expected perquisite of their disgrace. The slave's body, the first and final frontier of dominion. Within the walls of the domus, the master's power was sexual, absolute, and inscribed by law. The slave, defined as a living tool, instrumentum vocil, possessed no legal personhood from which consent could even be conceived. Access to slaves of any age or gender was not an abuse of power, it was a calm, routine exercise of it. This foundational reality transformed the Roman household from a sanctuary into a private theater of unchecked exploitation. The spintry, assembly line depravity. Beyond common brothels lay a tier of elite specialization, the spintry These were establishments featuring slaves trained to perform highly specific, often physically demanding or degrading acts. Their services were so catalogued that clients used numbered tokens, tesserae, to select them. This was not passion. It was the cold, efficient consumption of human beings reduced to a menu of functions, a pinnacle of dehumanizing organization in the pursuit of novel sensation. Imperial excess, the naked display of potestas. The depravities of a Caligula or a Tiberius were not mere madness. They were the ultimate political thesis. By turning the imperial palace into a brothel or staging elaborate sexual rituals on Capri, an emperor performed a devastating act of theater. He demonstrated that he existed not above the law, but outside of it entirely. His potestas power was so absolute it could rewrite the most fundamental social codes on a whim, transforming the entire state into his violated plaything. The munus is a lie, the bloody currency of patronage. The gladiatorial games were never merely entertainment. They were munus a duty or obligation paid by the elite to the masses, but this was a brutal negotiation. Each spectacle was a transaction, purchasing political capital and social control with coinage of flesh and blood. The crowd's cheers were a form of volatile credit, and the arena was the counting house where the debt of elite rule was periodically and violently settled. The editor, choreographer of the damned. Forget the myth of the whimsical thumb. The editor, the magistrate funding the games, was a meticulous stage director of death. Months in advance, his team planned the executions, summa supplicia with narrative precision, the costumes, the sequence of torments, the symbolic props. Each death was a preordained scene in a script designed to reinforce a social lesson: order over chaos, Roman justice over barbarism, his own magnificence over the fragility of the condemned. Damnatio ad bestias, a mythological end for the nameless. Being condemned to the beasts was not a simple mauling. It was a prolonged psychological opera. Prisoners were often dressed as tragic mythical figures, Icarus, Orpheus, Hercules, and a narrative was staged around them. Their suffering became a living, screaming pantomime of a familiar myth, a grotesque parody of culture that allowed the audience to witness the deconstruction of a story and a human being simultaneously. The Normatia, conquest over nature itself. The ultimate display of waste was not gold or grain, but reality itself. The Normatia asterisk, a staged sea battle on artificial lakes or flooded basins, was the pinnacle of this assertion. By commanding land to become sea and condemned men to refight historical naval battles to the death, an emperor demonstrated a power so profound it could warp geography, expend hundreds of lives as theatrical extras, and rewrite history itself for a single afternoon's spectacle. The Meridiani, the industrialization of death. In the lull of the midday sun came the game's most chilling truth, the asterisk Meridiani asterisk, the noonday men. These were the common criminals, the poor, the nameless, killed without glory, training, or narrative in swift mechanical slaughter. This was not thrilling combat, it was bureaucratic administrative death. It served as a brutal reminder that beneath the glamour of the gladiator, the engine of the games was a cold, efficient factory for disposing of human surplus. The servus sine effectibus, engineering the perfect tool. The Roman ideal was not a slave who obeyed, but a slave who could not conceive of another existence. This was the asterisk servus sine effectibus asterisk, the slave without attachments. Through systematic sale, separation of families, and the destruction of kinship bonds, the elite worked to excise the very capacity for love or loyalty not directed at the master. The goal was to create a human object, emotionally hollowed out, whose entire world was the will of the owner. The ergastulum, a tomb for the living. Beneath the sun-drenched estates lay their inversion, the ergastulum asterisk. This was the slave prison, often a subterranean barracks attached to mills or mines. Here, humans were reduced to mere components of extraction. Life expectancy was measured in seasons, not years. The lash here was not corrective, it was metabolic, a necessary fuel to propel broken bodies just a little longer until the earth or the darkness claimed them. The collar's litany, a fugitive's public confession. Slave's body could be made to confess its status, even against its will. Collars and brands served as permanent, walking legal documents. The most chilling inscription, Fugi teen me, revocami domino, I have fled, hold me, return me to my master. This was more than identification. It was a script forced onto the runaway, turning every citizen who read it into a potential agent of their recapture, transforming society itself into an extension of the master's gaze. The villicus, the trauma of the slave-driving slave. The overseer villicus, often a slave himself, represents one of the system's most psychologically corrosive innovations. Promoted from the ranks, he was granted a shred of authority in exchange for becoming the primary instrument of terror against his own. This dynamic bred a notorious, calculated brutality, a performance of cruelty meant to prove loyalty to the master and distance himself, at all costs, from the humanity of those he tormented. The servus publicus, the city's human infrastructure. For tasks too vile, too dangerous, or too sacrilegious for even the lowest citizen, Rome employed the asterisk servus publicus asterisk, the state-owned slave. These men were the living machinery of the city's underbelly, clearing the clogged asterisk cloaca maxima of its suffocating filth, dragging the unclaimed dead to mass pits, operating the machinery of the state torture chamber. They were Rome's permanent, disposable custodians of horror. Deification, the ultimate legal fiction of power. Apotheosis was more than posthumous honor, it was a brilliant political technology. By declaring a dead emperor a divus, a god, the Senate did not merely memorialize him, they created a new state-funded priesthood, immense temple estates, and a sacred bureaucracy. This divine institution, wielding the late emperor's authority and wealth, became an unchecked political weapon in the hands of his successors and the elite, allowing them to rule under the immutable veneer of celestial mandate. The Arval Brethren, state sacrifice, and the whisper of the unthinkable. Beyond the public temples, ancient, secretive priesthoods like the asterisk fratres Arvils performed rites for the state's salvation. Their meticulously recorded rituals of animal sacrifice and archaic chants were orthodox. Yet in times of plague, famine, or military catastrophe, dark rumors swirled that the logic of Roman religion, that greater crises demanded greater sacrifices, could push these custodians of tradition toward the ultimate, unspeakable propitiation, human life. The Lupercalia, sacred whips, and the performance of fertility. During this archaic February festival, young nobles, the Luperci sacrificed a goat, fashioned its hide into whips, and ran through the city, striking any woman they encountered. This was not random violence, but a sacred, public duty believed to ensure fertility and ease childbirth. It was a potent, chilling display of how ritual could sanction and sanctify physical violation, transforming an act of assault into a civic and spiritual necessity. The Taurobolium, the drenching spectacle of salvation. In the bloody mystery cult of Cybele and Mithras, initiation reached its peak in the Taurobolium *. The initiate descended into a pit, covered by a wooden grate. Above, a priest sacrificed a bull, allowing its hot blood to rain down, drenching the recipient completely. This was spirituality as overwhelming, visceral theater, a literal baptism in gore that promised rebirth through a terrifying, sensorial overload of life and death. Projection onto the Christians, the empire's dark reflection. When the Roman elite accused Christians of atheism, incest, and cannibalism, they were engaging in a profound, cynical projection. They saw in the Christians' secret suppers, agape feasts, a mirror of their own ritualized consumption. In charging them with hatred of the human race, they inverted their own systemic dehumanization. Persecution was, in part, a frantic effort to exterminate a group that, by its mere existence, exposed the rotting moral core of Romanitas itself. The Salutatio, the daily auction of dignity. Each dawn, the halls of the powerful swarmed with clients, lesser citizens, freedmen, and aspirants, performing the ritualized greeting, the Salutatio *. This was a carefully staged humiliation, hours of waiting, a rushed moment of obeisance, all for a token handout, the Sportula, a small basket of food or coins. It was not charity, but a daily, public reinforcement of the feudal chain, reducing men to dependent supplicants who paid for their sustenance with their time and self-respect. The parasitus, the professional scapegoat. The parasite was not a mere moocher, but a sanctioned social archetype. His role at the Cena * was contractual. In exchange for a meal, he offered his dignity as the evening's entertainment. He endured relentless verbal and sometimes physical abuse, laughed at insults, and performed ludicrous tasks. His presence allowed the host to demonstrate supremacy and the guests to bond through shared contempt, all while the parasite internalized his degradation as a professional skill. Cicero's courtroom, where words were warrants for death. Legal advocacy in the late Republic was a blood sport with mortal stakes. Orators like Cicero wielded eloquence as a weapon of mass destruction. A successful prosecution could lead to a qui etignis interdictio exile, or, in the proscriptions, outright murder and confiscation of property. The courtroom became an extension of the battlefield, where destroying an opponent legally meant also destroying his network of clients and allies, erasing his entire social and economic existence. The delator, the state-sanctioned vampire. The imperial era perfected a hideous career path, the professional informer * delator. Encouraged by laws offering a portion of a convicted man's estate, these men made betrayal a business. They trafficked in whispers of treason, sacrilege, or tax evasion, primarily targeting the wealthy. This system weaponized greed and paranoia, turning the citizenry against itself and allowing the emperor to drain the resources and eliminate the rivals of the elite under a cloak of legalistic murder. Trimalchio's feast, the blueprint of contempt. Petronius's * Satyricon is less satire than documentary. The fictional feast of the freedman Trimalchio is a precise map of the elite's social universe. Every detail, the segregated seating, the extravagant yet vulgar dishes, the forced performances, the calculated insults, served one purpose: to manifest the rigid, brutal hierarchy of Roman society in real time. The Cena was the stage where power was not just displayed, but ingested, and where every guest was reminded of their exact, precarious coordinate in the cosmos of contempt. The Asarotos oikos, luxury's deliberate stain. The unswept floor mosaic was the ultimate piece of decadent psychological theater. Meticulously crafted from thousands of tesserae, it depicted the tantalizing scraps of a feast: fish bones, nutshells, fruit pits, as if just discarded. Inlaid in the actual floor, it forced guests to walk over a frozen moment of glorious waste, a permanent reminder that their host's abundance was so profound it could afford to be enshrined in its own detritus. The slaves on the wall, frozen in servitude. The frescoes of Pompeii and Herculaneum do more than depict myths. In quiet corners, they capture the real human machinery of the house, a baker at his oven, a weaver at a loom, a servant carrying an amphora. These are not generic types, but likely portraits of specific, owned individuals. Their presence on the wall immortalized their function, transforming living people into permanent, decorative extensions of the master's property, forever fixed in a pose of productive servitude. Skeletons at the symposium, the laughter of the damned. Roman convivial philosophy reached its zenith in silverware designed to provoke existential dread. Exquisitely crafted cups and plates bore inscriptions like Respicer post te, hominem te esse memento, look behind you, remember you are mortal, alongside images of dancing skeletons or decaying corpses. This was not somber reflection, but a defiant, nihilistic garnish to pleasure, a reminder that every act of elite consumption was performed in the grinning face of oblivion. The Lyre and the Lash, poetry's coercive gaze. The love poetry of Catullus and Ovid reveals the erotic landscape of the elite as a theater of domination. Catullus's passions are exercises in obsessive possession and punitive jealousy. Ovid's *Ars Amatoria is not a romance manual, but a tactical guide for social warfare, using seduction to infiltrate, humiliate, and plunder the social capital of rivals. In their verses, love is reconfigured as another sophisticated arena for conquest and control. Satire's boot on the neck. The vitriolic verse of Juvenal and Martial did not speak truth to power. It was the cultural enforcement of power. Their scathing attacks rarely targeted the truly mighty. Instead, they trained their wit on the vulnerable, the upstart freedman, the poor provincial, the agging courtier, the grasping poor. Their satire was a social policing mechanism, using ridicule to enforce hierarchy and allow the elite to laugh at the misery and ambition of those they crushed beneath them. Patria potestas, the domestic death sentence. Roman law granted the *paterfamilias*, the male head of household, near theological authority, the *vitae nescis potestas, the power of life and death. This was not an abstract right. He could legally execute his children for disobedience, sell his sons into slavery to settle debts, or force his daughter's divorce. The family home was not a sanctuary, but a sovereign state where the father's will was the only constitution, and his judgment could be fatal. Expositio, the calculus of the cesspit. The exposure of infants, leaving them on dung heaps or public refuse piles, was not a rare tragedy, but a grimly rational family planning tool. Female infants, those with disabilities, or illegitimate children were the most common victims. This act of passive infanticide transformed the biological act of birth into a cold review of assets and liabilities, where a newborn's life was weighed against its projected social value and economic cost. The Univira trap, chastity as a political cage. Elite culture celebrated the *Univira*. The woman married only once. Widows were pressured into a performative, lifelong chastity to honor their deceased husband's lineage. Yet this ideal collided brutally with political reality. The same families that praised the *Univira would routinely force their widowed daughters into new, advantageous marriages against their will, making a woman's body a permanent site of conflict between symbolic virtue and dynastic strategy. The pet slave, a child's first lesson in dominion. A crucial element in the education of a young Roman aristocrat was his pedagogus *, a slave assigned as his tutor and constant companion. This relationship was a primary training ground for tyranny. The boy was encouraged to bully, mock, and abuse this attendant as a formative exercise of power. It served to inculcate, from childhood, the instinct that there existed a class of human beings whose purpose was to absorb his whims and rages without recourse. The dominor's gilded vengeance. While the *paterfamilias wielded legal terror, the mistress of the house, the dominor *, exercised a more intimate, often more volatile tyranny. Wielding absolute power over the household's female slaves, she acted as judge, jury, and executioner for perceived slights, a broken dish, a lingering glance, a suspected affair. Punishments from savage floggings to disfigurement were fueled by jealousy, insecurity, and the relentless pressure to police the very same female virtues society demanded of her. Mos maiorum, the tyranny of precedent. Every act of brutality, every codified injustice, found its ultimate sanction in the mos maiorum *, the custom of the ancestors. This was not a gentle nostalgia, but an ideological weapon of immense power. Invoking tradition served as an unanswerable argument, transforming active choices of cruelty into passive obligations of heritage. It created a moral and intellectual force field around the status quo, where questioning any horror was framed as an affront to the very founders of Rome itself. Otium, the leisure of the damned. For the Roman elite, life was divided between negotium public business and otium leisure. But otium was not rest. It was the cultivated sphere where the horrors we've catalogued were not only practiced, but refined into an art form. The banquet, the poetry, the sexual escapades, the connoisseurship of pain, this was the performance of otium. It was in leisure that a Roman proved he was not a mere bureaucrat or soldier, but a true master of the world's pleasures and its sufferings. The Pax Romana, a peace forged in the crucible. The famed Roman peace was not a gentle idyll. It was a predatory ecosystem. The roads that connected the world, the aqueducts that fed cities, the legions that policed the frontiers. This magnificent infrastructure was not built in spite of the systematized cruelty, but because of it and upon it The Pax Romana was a Faustian bargain for the known world. Sublime order and technological marvels, purchased with an endless currency of human suffering and degradation. A mirror, not a fossil. In concluding our journey, we must confront a disquieting truth. The Roman elite are not grotesque aliens from a distant moral universe. They are a stark, unfiltered reflection of a human potential. Their true horror lies in demonstrating what becomes possible when absolute power, philosophical justification, legal sanction, and immense wealth converge. They built a civilization where dehumanization was not a bug, but the central operating system, a chilling reminder that the capacity to aestheticize violence lies not in the past, but in the human condition itself. The Publicani, licensed vampires of the provinces. Roman state outsourced its greed. Elite equestrian companies, the Publicani *, bid for the right to collect provincial taxes. They paid the treasury a lump sum up front, then descended on regions with private militias to extract whatever they could, far beyond the official levy. Debtors were imprisoned, tortured, and their families sold off to settle debts. This was not corruption. It was the system, legalized shareholder-funded pillage, where profit was directly proportional to cruelty. Nexum, the debt chain that bound souls. In early Rome, the specter of nexum debt bondage cast a long shadow. A free citizen, unable to pay a debt, could be seized by his creditor and enslaved, along with his entire family. While formal nexum was abolished, its logic poisoned the social memory. It established the foundational principle that a Roman's body and liberty were collateral, a notion that never fully disappeared, merely transforming into the economic terror wielded by later bankers and landlords. The Argentarii, architects of patrician ruin. The elite Roman banker was a political predator. He specialized in identifying senators or nobles in temporary disgrace or cash flow crisis, offering lavish short-term loans at lethal terms. When the debt came due, refusal or inability to pay was not a financial dispute. It was a social death sentence. The resulting forced auctions of ancestral estates and art collections, often bought by the banker himself at a pittance, were a refined form of murder, with suicide a common final note. Famine as a financial instrument. During grain shortages, the true horror often wasn't poor harvests, but the deliberate engineering of scarcity. Senatorial landowners and speculators would hoard vast stores of fermentum in private granaries, strangling the public supply. As prices skyrocketed and the plebs starved, they would finally release their stocks, at obscene profits. This was economic sadism, the conscious manipulation of a basic human need to translate the agony of the poor directly into the gilded coffers of the rich. Proscriptio, the shopping list of death. The proscription lists of Sulla, the Second Triumvirate, and others were more than kill lists. They were the legal frameworks for the greatest hostile takeovers in history. By posting a man's name, you rendered him an outlaw and his entire estate forfeit. Rivals and informers would then race to claim these properties at state auction for a fraction of their worth. Proscription transformed political murder into an efficient, bureaucratized asset strip, turning blood into real estate and art. The triumph, a living cartoon of conquest. The Roman triumph was the ultimate victory parade, but its climax was a state-sanctified atrocity. The defeated enemy king or general, after being displayed in chains through the streets as a living trophy, was ritually strangled in the subterranean darkness of the Tullianum prison. This was not a discreet execution. It was the necessary, sacred conclusion of the ritual, the transformation of a human being from a formidable adversary into a cursed object, publicly annihilated to complete the story of Roman invincibility. Decimatio, the arithmetic of collective guilt. The ultimate military terror was not inflicted by the enemy, but by one's own command. Decimatio was the ritualized punishment for cowardice or mutiny. The condemned cohort drew lots, and the 10% who drew the fatal mark were clubbed or stoned to death by their own 9 comrades. This was discipline refined into a psychological poison, forcing soldiers to become executioners, binding them together not in loyalty, but in shared, murderous trauma. Legionary rape, the weapon of final pacification. Following the legions, beyond the slaughter of battle, came a systematic campaign of sexual terror. The rape of women, men, and children in conquered towns was not the action of a few rogue soldiers. It was tacitly endorsed policy. It served a tactical purpose, to shatter the cultural and familial integrity of a people, to imprint Roman dominance on the most intimate level, and to transform the very act of generation into a living memory of subjugation. The Praetorian auction, the sword that owned the state. The imperial bodyguard stationed in Rome realized they were not servants of the emperor, but his jailers and the jailers of the empire. Their power to assassinate a ruler, as they did with Caligula, and then literally auction the purple to the highest-bidding senator, Didius Julianus, revealed the core truth of the Principate. The military, at its heart, was a mercenary force, and the throne was not a sacred office, but a prize to be purchased from the men who held the swords. Veteran colonies, the plowshare as a weapon of erasure. To reward his legionaries, a general or emperor would not just give them land, he would give them someone else's asterisk land. Entire communities were forcibly expelled from ancestral fertile territories to make way for asterisk coloniae asterisk of retired soldiers. This was ethnic cleansing with a bureaucratic seal, a peaceful transfer that served as the final agricultural phase of conquest, erasing a native past and implanting a permanent, militarized Roman future. The quaestio, the slave's body as a legal instrument. In Roman courts, the truth was not found through inquiry, but extracted through agony, but only from certain bodies. The testimony of a slave was legally admissible asterisk only if obtained under torture. This created a grotesque marketplace. A master could lend his slaves to be tortured in a case against a rival, turning human beings into living, screaming deposition machines. The law had thus ingeniously designed a system where the most reliable evidence was born from the suffering of the legally voiceless. The Pona Cullae, the mythology of punishment. For the rare crime of parricide, killing a parent, Roman justice abandoned all restraint for a symbolic spectacle. The condemned was sewn into a leather sack asterisk culleus, with a viper, a dog, a rooster, and a monkey, then thrown into a river or sea. This was not mere execution. It was a ritual of purification by contagion. The animals represented wild, impure, and chaotic elements, and the sack was a womb expelling a corrupted being from the human and natural order entirely. Civis Romanus Sum, the litany of privilege. The chasm between citizen and non-citizen was measured in pain. A citizen convicted of a capital crime could expect the relatively clean, swift death of the axe or exile. For the foreigner, the slave, or the provincial, the state's imagination flourished. Crucifixion, a days-long public agony, burning alive, or being torn apart by beasts in the arena. Roman justice was a two-tiered system, one of penalty for its own, another of exemplary theatrical torment for the rest of the world. Justice on the scales of gold. The Roman courts, particularly under corrupt emperors, operated as open markets. Judges, judices, and jurors had fixed prices, with advocates and litigants openly bidding for favorable verdicts. The concept of impartial justice was a cynical joke. The courtroom was an extension of the forum's commerce, where legal merit was just another commodity, and the law was a weapon available only to those who could afford to load it. The delator ecosystem, the industry of false witness. Beyond lone informers, there evolved sophisticated syndicates of delators. These networks employed spies, forgers, and professional perjurers to construct airtight, fabricated cases against the wealthy. They operated as legal predators, identifying targets, manufacturing evidence, and splitting the profits of the confiscated estates. This transformed the entire legal system into a predatory organ, using the facade of treason trials to systematically harvest the assets of the elite class itself. The Venatio, a genocide of marvels. The arena hunts, Venations, were a carnival of extinction. To display dominion over nature, the Romans systematically captured and slaughtered the most magnificent creatures of their empire: North African forest elephants, Libyan lions, Berber leopards, Caspian tigers. Entire regional populations were culled to supply a single day's spectacle. This was not hunting. It was the organized eradication of the exotic, transforming biodiversity into a transient, bloody pageant to demonstrate that nothing in the world, however rare or powerful, was beyond Rome's capacity to consume and destroy. The empire's arboreal holocaust. Roman luxuria demanded a sacrifice of antiquity. Entire ancient forests, cedars from Lebanon, oaks from Cisalpine Gaul, were clear-cut to panel banquet halls, frame sprawling villas, and most prosaically, fuel the hypocausts of the public baths. This was not resource management, but an act of territorial vanity, transforming millennia-old ecosystems into temporary, consumable symbols of comfort, leaving behind eroded hillsides and a silent, permanent ecological debt. Aqueducts, the hydraulic leash. Aqueducts were marvels of engineering, but their political logic was one of absolute control. Emperors and provincial governors wielded water as a weapon. Loyal cities were rewarded with new, lavish supplies. Rebellious or disfavored communities could find their aqueducts mysteriously in need of repair or deliberately diverted, condemning them to thirst, disease, and social collapse. Rome did not just bring water, it held the tap, making survival itself a reward for obedience. The imperial cage, a world in miniature misery. Beyond the arena, emperors maintained private menageries, pits, cages, and cramped enclosures for elephants, rhinos, big cats, and rare birds. These were not conservation efforts but living maps and prisons. Each animal was a testament to a conquered territory, kept in unnatural, often fatal confinement. This collection of suffering curiosities was the ultimate demonstration of imperial reach. The entire natural world, subdued, depressed, and on permanent, miserable display. The economics of the impossible. The Roman elite's lust for amber from the Baltic and spices from India and Arabia created networks of absurd extravagance. Fortunes were spent to move minuscule quantities of pepper, silphium, or perfumes across continents. This was not commerce, but a performative conquest of geography. It demonstrated that no distance was too great, no cost too high, to satisfy a Roman whim. The very absurdity of the cost was the point, proof that the market's logic bent to their desire. Flagellatio, the mob at your door. Before the courts came the crowd. Flagellatio was a legally tolerated form of vigilante debt collection. A creditor would gather a clamorous mob outside a debtor's home, publicly shouting accusations, insults, and demands for payment. This sonic siege, sanctioned by custom, transformed private financial failure into a devastating public spectacle. It weaponized social shame, breaking the debtors standing in the community long before any legal judgment could be rendered. Carmine Famoso, the hit song of slander. In the war of public reputation, elites hired professional versifiers and gangs of street singers to compose and broadcast Carmina Famosa *, catchy, obscene, and devastatingly personal songs about their rivals. Sung in the forum, at crossroads, and outside the target's house, these tunes turned complex political grievances into humiliating popular jingles. It was propaganda weaponized as earworm, ensuring a man's alleged cowardice, perversion, or incompetence became the gossip of every Roman street. The banquet of ashes. A particularly refined form of social destruction was the compulsory invitation. A powerful patron could force a dependent or rival to attend a feast, knowing the guest would be the evening's universal target of vicious jokes, subtle slights, and open contempt. The victim was required to smile, toast, and give thanks. To show anger or refuse to attend was to risk economic obliteration or worse. This transformed the convivial cena into a slow, ceremonial devouring of a man's dignity. The toga of dishonor. For a Roman woman, clothing was identity. The respectable matrona wore the stola *. As punishment for adultery or prostitution, a woman could be forced to wear the toga *, the garment of the citizen male. This was a profound, symbolic unmooring. It publicly declared her not just immoral, but alien to her own gender, stripped of the social and legal protections of womanhood and caste into a grotesque, liminal category of disgrace. The rostra, altar of public execution. The speaker's platform in the forum was not just for oratory, it was the stage for social murder. A skilled orator like Cicero would not only attack his enemy with words, but would dramatically produce and read aloud the target's stolen private letters, diaries, or love poems to the roaring crowd. This turned the most intimate confidences into public fodder, eviscerating a man's private self as a prelude to his political and physical destruction. The Venefica, the ghost in the triclinium. The greatest fear in an elite Roman household walked on silent feet. The Venefica *, the poisoner, was often not a stranger, but a trusted slave, a disgruntled wife, or a grasping heir moving invisibly within the family circle. This reality bred a universal, quiet paranoia that turned every meal, every cup of wine, into a potential coup. The dinner table became a silent battlefield, where the weapons were untraceable herbs, and the first symptom of defeat was a coldness in the limbs. Depictions, binding the gods to your malice. When human means fell short, the Roman elite turned to infernal contractors. Depictions were lead curse tablets, inscribed with pleas to chthonic spirits to inflict specific horrors on rivals, sickness, impotence, legal defeat, or a slow, wasting death. Nailed, twisted, and buried in grave or foul pits, these tablets were more than superstition. They were a tangible export of hatred into the supernatural realm, a black magic born of boundless spite. The augur's nod, when omens were weapons. The state religion was a political instrument. Corrupt haruspices, priests who read entrails, and augurs, who interpreted bird flights, could be bribed to declare the gods displeased, halting legislation, voiding elections, or most lethally, pronouncing that the state's safety required the removal of a political rival. This sacralized assassination turned murder into a pious act, with the will of Jupiter himself as the hired killer. Impusa panic, the politics of the monstrous. The fear of impusi shape-shifting, blood-drinking female demons was a genuine cultural anxiety. The elite weaponized this superstition, insinuating that unpopular or reclusive political figures consorted with, or even were, such creatures. To accuse a man of nocturnal blood rites was to paint him as a predator upon the very body of the citizenry, translating political opposition into a visceral, supernatural threat. Aconitum, the invisible executioner. The pharmacopoeia of the Roman elite contained agents of stealthy death. Poisons like aconite, wolfsbane, with its delayed symptoms resembling fever or heart failure, were the tools of choice for patient murder. Administered by a trusted hand over days or weeks, they turned a healthy victim into a gradually failing one, allowing the murderer to mourn publicly while the untraceable illness did its work, blending murder seamlessly into the natural order. Insulae, profiting from the vertical coffin. The Roman elite did not merely ignore the poor, They engineered and profited from their misery. They owned the insulae the towering, jerry-built tenements of the city. Constructed of wood and rubble, prone to collapse and fire, these death traps yielded exorbitant rents for squalid, single-room dwellings. The slumlord was a respected capitalist, his wealth directly extracted from the constant, calculated risk he imposed on the lives of thousands. The Panopticon Domus. The design of the elite Roman house, Domus, was a masterclass in architectural control. Its linear, axis-based layout, from the atrium to the peristylium created long sight lines. Slaves were forced to move through highly visible corridors and courtyards, their every passage subject to observation. The architecture itself enforced a state of perpetual, silent surveillance, making the home a machine for the management of human property. Cryptoporticus, the architecture of secrets. Beneath the sunlit courtyards ran the Cryptoporticus a hidden, vaulted passageway. This architectural secret served the elite's dark necessities, a conduit for spies to move unseen, a route for the master to access guests or slaves covertly, and most chillingly, a discreet means to remove a body, whether from a private murder, a fatal punishment, or a discreet abortion, without disturbing the household's public facade. Latifundia, the private republic of Tero. Beyond the city's gaze, the latifundia vast agricultural estates operated as autonomous fiefdoms. Owned by absentee elites, they were worked by chained slave gangs, ergastula, under the whip of a brutal overseer, villicus and guarded by private militias. These were not farms, but fortified islands of absolute dominion, where the master's law was the only law, and the horrors enacted within its boundaries were invisible to the civilized world. Cloaca Maxima, the bowels of the Republic. The Great Sewer was the sublime, hidden counterpart to the glorious city above. This engineering marvel, which carried the city's filth to the Tiber, was maintained by servi publici state slaves who descended into the darkness. They died from methane fumes, disease, and collapse, their bodies sometimes lost in the waste. The cloaca was a literal and metaphorical underworld, a dark, sacrificial realm whose silent, suffocating labor made the shining world of the elite possible. Pyrrhica, the dance of blades. Public dances in Rome were not mere entertainment, they were rehearsals for violence. The Pyrrhica a martial dance, performed with real swords and shields, was a spectacle of controlled menace. These performances, thrilling the crowd with the flash of steel, often deliberately blurred the line between choreography and combat. Accidental wounds, staged duels, and real bloodshed were features, not bugs, transforming artistic performance into a sanctioned, aestheticized preview of the arena's brutality. Histrions, the beloved scapegoats. Roman actors could achieve immense fame and public adoration, yet they remained trapped by the legal stain of infamia. This same crowd that cheered them could, at a magistrate's whim or a patron's offense, see them publicly flogged or even executed for an improvised line deemed seditious or insulting. Their bodies and talents were celebrated, but their legal personhood was a fiction, making them the ultimate disposable darlings of the populace. The mime, when the stage was a scaffold. Roman mime theater discarded metaphor. It pursued a grotesque, sensational realism. Performances of adultery, rape, or mythological torture were not simulated. They were carried out on stage using condemned criminals or slaves as unwilling performers. The crucifixion of a convict during a mime was a documented climax. Here, the distinction between entertainment and public execution dissolved completely, the stage becoming an extension of the butcher's block. Pantomimus, the gilded cage of the star. The Pantomimus, a masked dancer who performed mythical narratives, was often the empire's biggest celebrity. Yet behind the cult following and wealth lay a pervasive truth. These stars, usually slaves or freedmen, were sexually commodified by their elite patrons and owners. Their artistic mastery made them valuable properties, but it did not shield them from exploitation. It merely increased the price and prestige of accessing them. Ludus, the forge of broken men. The gladiator school was less a training academy and more a high-output prison factory. New recruits, novices, were branded, shackled, and subjected to a dehumanizing regimen of repetitive, brutal drills under the Lannister's whip. The goal was systematic: to shatter the individual's past identity and forge the remnants into a specialized, disciplined killer, a product with a finite, bloody shelf life, psychologically engineered for spectacle. The Augustas brew, matriarchs of the poison chalice. In the dynastic snake pit, the emperor's wife and mother often became the chief architect of succession. Figures like Livia, wife of Augustus, and Agrippina the Younger, mother of Nero, were feared not for open violence, but for the intimate, untraceable kind. Ancient historians paint them as masterminds of slow poison and culinary treachery, using the private sphere of the family meal to orchestrate the murder of rivals and clear the path of thrones with a homemaker's meticulous care. Damnatio memoriae, erasure from the universe. For an emperor, death could be just the beginning of his punishment. The Senate could decree damnatio memoriae *, the condemnation of memory. His statues were toppled and defaced, his name chiseled from every public inscription, his laws annulled, and his image cut from family murals. This was more than posthumous disgrace. It was an attempt at metaphysical murder, a retroactive deletion of a man from history itself, making his entire existence a nullity. Puri delicati, the gilded orphans of the palace. The imperial court collected human beauty as others collected art. Puri delicati were exquisite, often orphaned or stolen children, kept as living ornaments. Dressed in finery, they served as cupbearers, playthings, and objects of aesthetic and often sexual appreciation. Their fate was entirely contingent on the emperor's fleeting favor. A growth spurt, a misspoken word, or a rival's jealousy could see them cast from splendor into darkness or death in an instant. The blood rite, kinslaying as a rite of succession. Within the Julio-Claudian and Severan dynasties, fratricide and parricide became institutionalized. Nero's poisoning of his stepbrother Britannicus, or Caracalla's murder of his brother Geta in their mother's arms, were not crimes of passion, but cold, preemptive strikes. Killing one's closest kin was the most decisive way to simplify the political equation, proving one possessed the ultimate, ruthless quality required to hold the throne, the capacity to extinguish the very blood that shared it. The incestum charge, the nuclear option against women. For an elite Roman woman, political power was always shadowed by sexual slander. The accusation of incestum, incest, was the most devastating weapon in this arsenal. Used against powerful figures like Julia the Elder, Augustus's daughter, and Valeria Messalina, Claudius's wife. These charges, whether rooted in truth, rumor, or pure fabrication, served a single purpose: to irreversibly pollute a woman's moral authority and justify her exile or execution, neutralizing her influence by painting her as a monster of unnatural lust. The triumphal feast, dining to the sound of strangulation. The ultimate Roman celebration featured a macabre soundtrack. As the elite reclined at the lavish public feast, *epulum, following a triumph, the climax of the ceremony unfolded beneath them. In the dank, subterranean Tullianum prison, the defeated enemy king or general, just hours earlier the parade's central trophy, was ritually strangled. The cheers of the banquet above and the death rattle below were part of the same symphony of conquest, linking culinary indulgence directly to the extinction of a rival's breath. Trimalchio's feast, the blueprint of vulgar dominion. Petronius's Satiricon is less a satire than a forensic document. Every grotesque detail of Trimalchio's feast, the sleight-of-hand dishes, the forced performances by enslaved children, the calculated humiliation of guests, the presentation of a mock funeral, is a precise archetype of elite practice. It reveals the scena as a kinetic social diagram, where power is exercised through the orchestration of surprise, waste, and degradation, proving that the parody was indistinguishable from the protocol. Visceratio, the scavenger's reward. Following the spectacles in the arena, the carnage continued in a different form. The carcasses of slaughtered animals, the bears, bulls, and ostriches, were hauled out and subjected to a chaotic, public butchering known as the visceratio *. The meat was flung or handed out to the plebs. This was not charity, but a deliberate act of demotion, turning the citizenry into a scrambling pack of scavengers, literally feeding them the bloody leavings of elite entertainment. Elagabalus's table, the tyranny of the caprice. The Emperor Elagabalus elevated the banquet to a theater of psychological torture. He would host lavish dinners where guests were served exquisite but inedible facsimiles, marble meats, wax fruit, painted bread. After their hunger and confusion peaked, the real feast would appear. This was not hospitality, but a cruel experiment in domination, demonstrating his power to manipulate their most basic expectations and emotions, making their sustenance itself contingent on his whimsical cruelty. Solicinium, the feast of hollow piety. The Solicinium asterisk, the funerary banquet held at the graveside, laid bare the hypocrisy of elite familial piety. While they dutifully dined among the tombs of their ancestors, the performance was one of obligation, not communion. It highlighted the chasm between the venerated, ossified past and the self-indulgent present, a ritual that honored the dead in form, while the living elite remained fundamentally committed to a world of sensation and power the departed could no longer touch. The Bacchanalian affair, when piety became insurrection. The Roman state's violent suppression of the Bacchanalia cult in 186 BC was not a moral crusade. It was a counterinsurgency operation. The secretive, cross-class networks formed in these ecstatic rites created a structure of loyalty and organization outside the control of the Senate and paterfamilias. The elite response, mass executions, imprisonments, exposed their core fear, not debauchery, but any collective experience, especially a religious one, that they could not directly oversee and dominate. Flamen Diales, the high priest in a gilded cage. The priest of Jupiter, the Flamen Diales, was a living paradox, one of Rome's most sacred figures, yet one of its most profoundly unfree. Bound by an endless web of taboos, he could not touch a dead body, see an army, wear a knot, or even spend a night outside the city. He became a prisoner of ritual purity. His life was a performance of extreme religiosity, a human monument to the elite's obsession with controlling even the most minute aspects of sacred life. Evocatio, divine defection as strategy. In the ultimate act of spiritual warfare, Roman generals would perform the evocatio before a besieged city. They would ritually call out the enemy's patron deity, promising a grander temple and more lavish worship in Rome if they abandoned their people. This was theological seduction and theft. It aimed to spiritually hollow out the enemy, convincing them their gods had literally switched sides, making military defeat feel like a divine abandonment. The Vestal's tomb, purification through live burial. For a Vestal virgin found guilty of incestum, breaking her vow of chastity, the punishment was a state-sanctioned horror. She was dressed in funeral robes, bound, and placed alive in an underground chamber with a loaf of bread and a lamp. The earth was then sealed above her. This was not a simple execution, but a ritual of containment. The living woman was interred as a polluted object to be reabsorbed by the earth, purging the state's sacred hearth of her perceived corruption. Haruspex, the butcher as bureaucrat. The Haruspex, divining the will of the gods from the entrails of sacrificed animals, was a central figure in state decision-making. The act itself was a prolonged, bloody ceremony of public dissection. The priest's probing fingers, reading the liver, lungs, and heart, transformed animal torture into political data. The fate of armies, the legitimacy of laws, and the timing of elections hung on the interpretation of steaming viscera, linking the highest affairs of state to a butcher's slab. Seneca's Stoicism, the philosophy of the complicit. Seneca the Younger, the famed Stoic philosopher, preached austerity, poverty, and inner peace. Meanwhile, he served as Nero's tutor and chief advisor, amassing one of the largest private fortunes in the empire through loans to provincials and complicity in tyranny. His philosophy provided not a challenge to the system, but a soothing, intellectual balm for the elite, a way to rationalize unimaginable wealth and moral compromise as a path to virtuous self-mastery. Grammaticus, the enslaved mind. The Roman elite entrusted the minds of their sons to educated Greek slaves, the grammatis asterisk. These men, often of refined culture and intellect, imparted the very foundation of Roman literary and rhetorical prowess. The profound irony was absolute. The vessel of high civilization was himself a res asterisk, a thing who could be, and often was, beaten for a student's poor performance. The system demanded that civilization itself be filtered through the body of a legally broken man. Pliny's universe, exploitation as natural law. Pliny the Elder's Natural History is a breathtaking encyclopedia of the known world, yet its clinical tone normalizes horror. He matter-of-factly describes mining techniques that kill slaves, the procurement of exotic animals for slaughter, and the uses of human-derived products. In Pliny's world, the brutal exploitation of people and nature is not a moral failing, but a simple, observable fact of the universe's operational logic, a scholarly endorsement of the status quo. The inked web, letters as weapons. The polished literary letters exchanged by the Roman elite, Cicero, Pliny the Younger, Seneca, were not mere correspondence. They were a high-stakes network of performance, espionage, and survival. Laden with flattery, layered irony, and coded critique, they served as diplomatic feelers, loyalty tests, and intelligence reports. A well-phrased letter could secure a pardon, a careless one could become evidence in a treason trial. The stylus was as deadly as the sword. History in the shadow of the palace. The great Roman historians did not write in a vacuum of truth. Livy crafted a mythic past to inspire or critique Augustus's new order. Tacitus wrote a searing indictment of the Principate, but from beneath the wary eye of Trajan. Suetonius compiled scandalous archives, often based on palace gossip. Their works were acts of propaganda, preservation, or posthumous damnatio, proving that in Rome, even the recording of history was a continuation of politics by other means. Lactarius, the milk of theft. The wet nurse Nutrix or Lactarius, a slave, performed the most intimate of maternal acts for her master's child. To ensure her milk supply, her own newborn infant was frequently taken from her, sold, exposed, or killed. Her body was thus forcibly converted into a dedicated resource, her natural lactation commandeered, and her motherhood erased to nurture the heir of the house that destroyed it. This was exploitation at the biological level. The womb for rent. A slave woman's reproductive capacity was a tangible asset. Elites could and did use enslaved women as surrogates to produce legitimate heirs, particularly if a wife was barren or of delicate health. The child was taken at birth, recognized as the master's, and the mother retained no claim. Her womb was treated as fertile arable land, tilled, sown with the master's seed, and its produce harvested as property, severing the bond of birth by legal decree. The gladiator's final disposal. Even in death, the gladiator remained a commodity. There was no right to honorable burial. His corpse, stripped of its valuable arms and armor, was typically hauled from the sand through the Porta Libertinensis gate of death. From there, it was unceremoniously dumped into the Tiber, cast into mass pits, or left for scavengers. The body that had moments before commanded roars of applause was now mere refuse, completing its journey from human to instrument to waste. Tunstrina, the razor's edge of trust. The Roman barbershop was a nexus of gossip and peril. Here, enslaved tonsors wielded open razors at the throats and cheeks of their elite patrons. This moment of absolute physical vulnerability was a daily ritual of trust that the slave had no grievance, no secret order, no moment of rebellion. The tunstrina thus became a powerful social observatory and a constant, quiet reminder of how the infrastructure of elite life depended on the forbearance of the oppressed. Paluctum, the parade of the waxen judges. At an elite funeral, the paluctum was a chilling spectacle. Actors wore hyperrealistic wax masks, imagines of the family's deceased ancestors dressed in the robes of their highest office. They proceeded in chariots, a silent, judging senate of the dead. This was not mere memorialization. It was a theatrical assertion of dynastic weight, pressuring the living heir to measure up to the scowling, waxen faces of his lineage, making inheritance a haunting. The Tarpeian Rock, the sacred precipice. From the very summit of Roman political and religious power, the Capitoline Hill, jutted the Tarpeian Rock. Here, the state performed its most symbolic executions. Traitors, perjurers, and failed vestals were thrown to their deaths. This was not a hidden dungeon. It was a public, topographical sermon. It demonstrated that betrayal of the state merited a fall from the city's greatest height, desecrating a sacred space with broken bodies to cement a political lesson. The Gemonian Stairs, the parade of the rotting. Just below the Capitoline, the scaly Gemonii asterisk were not mere steps, but a theatre of degradation. The corpses of the executed, strangled in the Tullianum, beheaded, or cast from the Tarpeian rock, were dragged here by hooks, subjected to public mutilation and ridicule, then left to bloat and decay for days. This gruesome display turned the very heart of the city into a charnel house stage, a final, foul lesson on the price of crossing the regime. The Palatine, the view from the pinnacle of power. The emperors and ultra-elite did not just rule the spectacle, they curated their view of it. Their sprawling villas on the Palatine Hill were strategically perched to overlook the Circus Maximus and the Forum. From their breezy peristyles, they could literally gaze down upon the roaring chaos, the chariot crashes, and the teeming masses, a physical manifestation of their divine remove, surveying the human theatre they financed and controlled from a god's eye vantage. The Tiber, the city's vein, the empire's sewer. The Tiber River was the liquid skeleton of Rome, and it bore witness to every horror. Its currents carried away more than sewage, the corpses of the executed from the Gemonian stairs, infants exposed on its banks, the discarded remains of gladiators and bestiarii and the offal from the city's slaughterhouses. The river was a flowing, open grave, a natural utility that absorbed the physical and moral waste of the capital, cloaking atrocity in the mundane process of drainage. The Lortumii, the quarry tomb of the Athenians. Following Rome's siege of Syracuse, 213–212 BC, a horror unfolded that would echo in Roman memory. Thousands of captured Athenian soldiers were imprisoned in the city's limestone quarries, the Lortumii asterisk. Left exposed to the elements in a vast, open pit, they succumbed to starvation, dehydration, and disease. This was not a battlefield death, but a slow, industrial-scale extermination through deliberate neglect, an early, chilling blueprint for the logistics of mass suffering. Panem et circenses, the compact of complicity. Bread and circuses was not mere bribery, it was a diabolical social contract. By providing free grain and relentless spectacle, the elite purchased more than quiet. They manufactured a populace that was not just pacified, but actively invested in and addicted to the system's outputs. The crowd's roar in the arena was the sound of this complicity, a shared celebration of violence that bound the masses to the very masters who exploited them. The Pax Romana, the calm of the conqueror. The famous Roman peace was not an absence of violence. It was the victory of a single, monopolized violence over all others. The roads, the laws, the commerce, all the fruits of the Pax asterisk were watered by the blood of conquest, the terror of the legions, and the silent screams from the ergastula and arena. The peace was the quiet that settled over a world where resistance had been systematically and horrifically extinguished. The Christian rejection, a faith forged in opposition. Early Christianity did not emerge in a vacuum. Its core tenets, charity for the poor, humility before God, the sanctity of every soul, the rejection of idolatry and spectacle, were a direct, point-by-point repudiation of the elite Roman value system. The faith offered a radical, countercultural sanctuary from the world of competitive cruelty, providing a spiritual framework for those systematically crushed by the machinery of Romanitas. The silent testimony of the broken. The literary record is curated by the elite. The archaeology of pain tells the unvarnished truth. The fused vertebrae from a lifetime of floggings, the slave collars with their pleading inscriptions, the mass grave of the arena, the cramped, dark barracks of the ergastulum asterisk, these are the direct material witnesses. They speak of a suffering so mundane and pervasive that the writers of history had no need to comment on it, leaving the bones and iron to testify instead. Otium cum dignitate, the lie they lived by. This was the elite's sacred mantra, leisure with dignity. It was the philosophical gloss that painted their world of sadistic banquets, calculated torture, and aestheticized violence as the pinnacle of civilized refinement. It allowed them to frame the whip hand as a steady one and the infliction of suffering as a dispassionate duty or sophisticated taste. This was the ultimate act of self-deception, dressing a culture of terror in the toga of civilized order. The final, unanswerable horror, it was all legal. This is the chilling conclusion. None of this was the work of rogue emperors or secret societies. Every horror catalogued, the sexual exploitation, the torture, the murderous games, the systemic dehumanization was legal asterisk. It was enabled, regulated, and protected by Roman law and custom. The elite's greatest achievement was not the art or the aqueducts, but the construction of a civilization where atrocity was not a crime, but a codified feature. Their true legacy is the blueprint for how law itself can be engineered to serve a machinery of cruelty.